Welcome to Solo, the single person's guide to a remarkable life. Your host, a behavioral scientist and bachelor, talks to leading experts and successful singles about living solo and living well. Travel more, make things, sleep in when you want to. Here's the playbook for the person who is unapologetically unattached. Now, please welcome Dr. Peter McGraw.
What are some of the other things that you've noticed in your work or beyond that's giving rise to this bigger group of solos?
I think one possible explanation could be just kind of the rise of economic opportunities for women. Mm-hmm. Obviously, we've seen a big rise in the number of women who are breadwinners for their family.
Mm-hmm. This is very real, and I think it's a good development. One of the things that you see worldwide is that countries that have a better social safety net, countries that are more egalitarian, also have more single people. I don't think it's because they're single. I think it allows people to be single. Welcome back. As you may know, I like to cite some striking statistics about the number of singles in the population. I often talk about how half of American singles are not interested in dating or a relationship at this time. That is, it is totally normal to want to date and to want to not date. In this episode, I invite the person who is responsible for some of those data, Anna Brown, a research associate at the Pew Research Center, a non-partisan, non-advocacy nonprofit. Anna presents some facts, and I do some editorializing. I hope you enjoy the episode. Let's get started. Welcome to Solo, the single person's guide to a remarkable life. I'm Peter McGraw. Today's guest is Anna Brown. Anna is a research associate at Pew Research Center, where she is involved in all stages of the survey research process, from designing questionnaires to analyzing polling data to writing reports. Her focus is on social and demographic trends, and her recent research has centered around racial attitudes, dating and relationships, and how the coronavirus pandemic has impacted Americans' financial outlooks. Anna received her bachelor's degree in politics from Oberlin College and a master's degree in survey methodology from the University of Maryland. Welcome, Anna.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a great pleasure. So we're going to be talking about the dating and relationship stuff. In particular, I'm focused on what I would call the rise of solos, the rise of single people. But before we get into all of that, how did you become such a nerd?
Yeah, well, like you said, my background is in political science and survey methodology. Survey methodology is definitely one of the nerdiest, most specific things you can study, I think. And yeah, I've been at Pew for about 8 years now, and I worked in political polling before that. Yeah, and some of my research interests are racial identity, LGBT Americans, and especially dating relationships. So I'm really excited to have the opportunity to talk to you.
Yeah, no, it's great fun. Now, polling has gotten a bad name recently, which I think is unfair.
Yeah, I can't tell you everything, but we have some very smart people who are looking into what went wrong, and I think we'll be able to improve a bit for next time.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I'm not criticizing. I actually think that there is a lot of value in just basically asking people their opinions, their lifestyle, their values, how they spend their time, etc. So what exactly is Pew Research Center? It comes up a lot. You folks are great at PR. Congratulations. It's pretty cool to be able to work on reports, that you have an organization that's good at getting those reports out to the world. But for someone who's only heard of it, what does Pew Research do? What's their goals? What are they good at? What are they not good at?
Yeah, so we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan, and non-advocacy organization.
Nonprofit.
Mm-hmm.
So you do make money, but only
we have funders, yes.
You have funders.
Yep.
Nonpartisan. So not right or left.
Yep, we're not taking any sides. And then we're also non-advocacy, which just means that we don't make any policy recommendations.
Okay. All right. And what is the reason for those three nons?
Well, so our goal is just to generate a foundation of facts that contributes to public dialogue and sound decision making. So kind of we're doing the research, we're coming up with the facts, and it's up to the rest of the world to interpret it, to use that to help build policies.
Yeah, that's neat. Or help them understand what it's like in the world of singles, as I'm trying to do.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's excellent. I have to tell you, the non-advocacy part, I'm very happy about. And the reason is that there are oftentimes when people are approaching this issue of dating and relationships in particular, they have a bias, which is a pro-marriage bias. And that, as a result, colors not only the types of questions that they ask and the people they poll, but also the way they present the data and then prescribe based upon those data. I'll say this as a quick aside. I'm doing a lot of stuff with the solo community on Clubhouse, this new audio app, and I found myself on a stage with a bunch of pro-marriage advocates who are either sociologists or statisticians or whatever, and it was really amazing how these academics, not only were they advocating, but they were advocating based upon a lot of correlational research in a way that was truly disturbing and frankly just out and out misleading. So I'm a big fan that you folks are non-advocate. And also, I would say non-partisan. I mean, both the right and the left are pro-family, but it's even stronger on at least the religious right that you find these kinds of things. All right, very good. And Pew Research Center has been around for a long time.
Yeah, since the 1990s.
Nice.
It's kind of a complicated history with a few different projects all kind of pursuing separate agendas, and then we unified as one Pew Research Center. But we still have teams who are studying both the global and U.S. population, studying things from religion to technology to politics and more.
Excellent. And so you said you've been there for 8 years?
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Well, that's great. I have noticed since I've started this project that Pew is one of the best sources of data about singles. And the reason I say best is in part because, as I said, a lot of the research focuses on marriage. And some of the work you have done has been focused on marriage, but some of the stuff is specifically about single living. And so was this like a strategic decision? Were you the person who spearheaded this? How did this come about?
Yeah, so my team studies all sorts of social and demographic trends. So, of course, a big one is marriage, family structure, things like that. But of course, the share of people who are unmarried has been rising. So as they kind of become a bigger group, we've been devoting a little more of our research agenda to studying them. And, we're also recognizing that there's a rise in other types of arrangements besides marriage, cohabiting before or instead of marriage, being in a long-term relationship without living together, casually dating, et cetera, et cetera. But we don't really have any government data that we can analyze on people's actual relationship status, just really their living arrangements and marital status. So we were really lucky to be able to do this survey that explored the experiences and attitudes of unmarried people who aren't in any sort of relationship or on the dating scene, things like that. So yeah, it was very exciting to get to pursue something that has not really seen a lot of research before.
I really appreciate it. It's been incredibly helpful for me, as I'll talk about in a moment. Let's talk about that methodology. So this is a large survey. How do you do it? Who gets surveyed? Why wasn't I asked about my wants and desires?
Of course. So yeah, we're lucky to have the American Trends Panel, which is our own exclusive to Pew Research Center nationally representative online panel of survey respondents. We actually have over 15,000 people on the panel. So you haven't been asked yet, but maybe in the future you will. And yeah, so that gives us a ton of flexibility. It's so large that we can get even pretty small groups like LGBT Americans and things like that. So that's how we did this particular survey, which was in 2019.
Okay. And there are some questions that are repeated every X years. So you get some longitudinal analysis, correct?
Yeah, we have some of that. The panel itself has only been around for a few years. And before that, we were asking a lot of questions on the telephone, like using phone surveys. So that has kind of introduced some complications because people tend to answer questions a little bit differently on the telephone versus in an online survey. So we're kind of starting anew with some of our trends. And definitely in the future, we're kind of building a foundation for that.
Yeah, that's excellent. So let's put aside those married people and let's talk about singles. Let's talk about my people, my listeners. So what are some of the standout findings that you and your team have recognized?
So we found that 31% of American adults are single, and here we're defining that as not married, not living with a partner, and not in a committed romantic relationship. The demographics of these people, so Black adults are a lot more likely than white or Hispanic adults to be single. Same pattern with looking at marriage rates as well. As you might expect, younger people are a lot more likely to be single than older people, but it is kind of a U-shaped curve there. So the youngest people are very likely to be single, and then you see an increase in people being single as they get older. But it's a really interesting age difference if you look at it by gender. So among men, half of adults younger than 30 are single, and that steadily decreases as they get older. But among women, actually half of those 65 and older are single.
Yeah, there's a mismatch. I want to return to the question of gender a little bit later, because I think it's very difficult to talk about the demographic trends, ignore gender, because there's a mismatch there. I think that's really very interesting. So one of the other things is that the median age of first marriages is going up. And so in 2019, average age for a man's 30, for a woman 28. That's a new high. I believe.
It's actually risen almost 8 years since the 1960s, and pretty steadily among both men and women.
Yes, it's really striking. Now, one of the things I think is really fascinating is it was at its lowest in the 1950s. Prior to the 1950s, it actually was higher. So there's almost a U that's happening from the early 1900s to 2019.
Yeah.
Which I think we can point to a little war there that had a little bit of an effect, among other things, I think, economic growth and so on. But that number creeping up, though, one of the questions I have about it is, to what degree is that number creeping up because of people delaying marriage? Like they're just waiting longer than they would normally, versus the group of people who are just never marrying, which both have an effect on that mean.
Yeah, so certainly both of them are contributing. So obviously the median age at first marriage has risen, but then over the same time period, the share who have never been married has also been rising pretty steadily. So that kind of indicates that both of those things are contributing to the rise of singles. And in 2017, in a survey, we asked people who had never been married if they wanted to get married. And a majority said that they did, 58%. About a quarter said that they were not sure if they wanted to or not. And then about 14% said that they don't want to get married. So to some extent, I think people haven't necessarily made up their mind if they are going to get married, but certainly there is a desire to get married. It's not necessarily that people have completely dropped off wanting to get married.
Yes, that's right. I mean, look, I think it's healthy to be like, I don't know, because this depends a little bit on who's that other person. What is your state of the world and so on. And so for people just to say absolutely in some ways is sort of surprising to me, given that marriage is actually a risky proposition in some ways. Certainly the cost of divorce alone. And it's also, as we know, risky for women, right? Like there is some sense of tying yourself to a man that can be, there's some very real downside this era. The last sort of striking finding is the percentage of Americans living alone, living solo. So be a one-person household. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So I guess some things that could be contributing to that are, like I said, some options other than marriage. I've heard of something called living apart together, where people who are in a committed relationship or even sometimes married are choosing to live apart for a variety of reasons. Since people are pushing having children later in life, they may also be pushing finding a partner to be later in life. Also, divorce among older people has actually doubled since the 1990s. And we know from the survey that older single people are less interested in dating than younger people. So they may be choosing not to enter another relationship.
Yeah, so this number, the one I've seen, is 28% of households in the United States are solo. And that is a huge increase since the 50s, like I think the 60s. I think it's like a 5-fold increase. And this is also, by the way, a worldwide trend that we're finding. So this is not limited to the United States. Northern Europe countries like Sweden, Finland, Denmark, Germany have rates in the 36% and above, something like that. But it's really, really striking that's there. So let's talk a little bit about some of the influences. What is it that's happening that's giving rise to the number of singles, to the solo living? You've already mentioned a few of them, but you also look at social pressure in some of these surveys. What's going on with that?
Yeah, so we asked single people if they feel much pressure to find a partner from family, friends, society in general. And most people said that they didn't feel a lot of pressure. And this was especially true of older singles. A majority of them said that they felt actually no pressure at all.
No one's pressuring me anymore.
Yeah.
And what do you mean by pressure? This is from friends, family?
Yeah, we asked about each of those separately. And for the most part, people just weren't really feeling much pressure from any of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. And is there a gender difference in pressure?
Actually, not much. They're roughly similarly likely.
Yeah, I found that a little bit surprising because my sense is that women, they may internalize some pressure, even if it's not overt, or at the very least, they're recognize that this tension that exists in their life, in part between like wanting or feeling like this is a step in life versus the ability to either get it, find it, or feeling the conflict with other things.
Actually, the one thing that we did see a difference on was that men were a little more likely to feel pressure from family members. So I found that interesting.
Yeah, I do too. Now, might some of that have to do with this age difference, right, that happens where there are more young men who are single? And so if, as you get older, you get less pressure, and if there are more single women as you get older, then it just could be a confound.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense.
I suspect. I took some stats classes too at some point, Anna. The good old, we need to run some partial correlations. So let's talk a little bit about, I think this idea that you're just sort of getting less pressure is very real. And I certainly think that we're seeing this in the media, right? So this has come up a number of times on the podcast, which is there is now a more balanced view of the options that exist in the world. There was Seinfeld. There was Sex and the City. There's these shows, the Friends, they're showing single people living kind of vibrant, fun. I think Friends was focused on that ultimate goal. I think Sex and the City was a conflicted view of it all. And I think that Seinfeld was sort of like without interest in it. You know what I mean? Like these people weren't on a mission to couple up, although they were actively dating, obviously, which is always a good form of comedy. But then also, I think there's also a flip side to that, which is in contrast to like Leave It to Beaver, you have like Married with Children and Desperate Housewives, and which takes a look into marriage that is not wholly positive, like sort of exposing some of the challenges exist, whether it be for comedic purposes with Married with Children. And I don't know, I don't watch Desperate Housewives, so I don't know how comedic that show was, intentionally or not. You're laughing, was it?
I have not seen a single episode.
Yeah, I know. That's fair. But my point is like the rise of this sort of diversity of television has kind of exposed alternative views that can be, I think, liberating there and can remove some of that pressure that's there. So let's talk a little bit about some of the other influences. Maybe I have a whole list of them. This has come up in a previous podcast called Rise of the Solo, but I think it's worth talking about these. But from your view as a researcher, besides this idea of less pressure, what else do you think is influencing the rise of the solo?
Yeah, I think all the ones we've talked about definitely have an influence. And we've also just actually asked people this in some of our surveys. So in our 2019 survey, we asked couples who are cohabitating why they weren't engaged or married. And the top reason that they said was that they weren't ready financially yet. And then in a different survey in 2019, we asked single people who aren't looking for a relationship or dates at all why they aren't looking. And the top reasons that they gave are that they have more important priorities and that they're just happy being single.
Yeah, I think that's super important. Hey, solo listeners. You know Julie Nervelli from her frequent appearances on the podcast. Well, her latest entrepreneurial venture, Bachelor Girl Productions, is now a sponsor. Bachelor Girl makes fun, flirty t-shirts that serve as an icebreaker when you are out and about. Let the world be your dating app with messages such as spoon size matters or all flirts welcome. You can also wear your Bachelor Girl t-shirt on an actual dating app picture. I recommend the message swipe right for that purpose. Just go to bachelorgirlproductions.com and use discount code SOLO for 20% off your order. That's SOLO in all caps at bachelorgirlproductions.com. Thank you, Julie, and thank you, Bachelor Girl. So I do a lot of citing your research. And one of the things that I talk about is that of adult singles, 50% are not interested in a relationship or dating at the moment. That's an incredible number because it just destroys a myth of the desperate, lonely, single person who just wants to be coupled up or for some reason can't pull it off. And they're waiting and hoping and desperate and sad and apologetic. And that's not the case at all. So what I say to people all the time is it's completely normal. It's as normal as wanting a relationship to not want a relationship. And I think that's a liberating statistic that's there. And then even more liberating is what you just said. Can you repeat the main reasons why people aren't looking for casual dating or relationship?
Yeah, the top two reasons were that they just have more important priorities and that they're happy being single.
God bless them. So I think that that's great, right? I mean, that's really the foundation of this podcast, which is there are other things you can do with your time, your energy, your resources. And also the idea is that you are not incomplete. This is not a liminal space to be in. You're not sitting around waiting. And there's certainly nothing wrong with you for not wanting those things. In the same way, there's nothing wrong with you for wanting those things. Actually, I think that it's either of those is a good path. I just want to make them equal paths for people to be on. And so, yeah, obviously, if you've got other cool things to do, if you're just happy being single, you don't have that same motivation. Because let's be honest, it takes work. Right? Dating and relationships, they take work and they are not always easy to pull off. Oh, but this is not exactly a new statistic, right? This is not a pandemic related thing. You have data 15 years ago that suggests a similar pattern, yes?
Yeah, we actually don't really have much data during the pandemic, so we can't really say how things have changed. Yeah, that was the first time we had asked that question in 2019, so we don't actually have much going back. But yeah, that was definitely before the pandemic. Another thing that people cited, and as you started to say yourself, I think some people may find the dating landscape these days just kind of intimidating. Almost half of Americans say that dating has gotten harder in the last 10 years. Again, that's not even thinking about the pandemic. This was before that. So it could be that that is a barrier and why people are single.
Yeah, I can save you a whole lot of research because I know exactly what's going on. And that is, on one hand, it's easier than ever because of the apps. And then because you have access to people you would never get a chance to meet otherwise. And especially if you have some sort of niche preferences, it's easier now to ever satisfy those kind of things. Say you're into kinky stuff. Well, now there's apps for that. Or if you're Jewish and you want to find a Jewish person, there's an app for that. Hell, there's Farmers Only. There's an app for that. And so
and people who have really small dating pools, like LGBT people, for example, they are far more likely to be using online dating sites than any other group.
Yeah, as they should. I mean, it's great in that way. Now, the problem, of course, and again, this is my non-scientific but incredibly confident experience with, is that there's just a lot of bad behavior because there's a lot of bad behavior within any sort of digital connections, because it's such weak ties, because it's sort of easy to flake, because there's this sort of seemingly unlimited supply and so on. But there are also some other reasons. I mean, actually, you folks have done some stuff, especially with regard to people's bad experiences with online dating, yes?
Yeah, we have. And as you might expect, women are a lot more likely to have experienced harassing behavior. And I mean, that applies to offline dating as well. We ask this in a more general way, too. And of course, women say that they've experienced unwanted touching, coercion to have sex, things like that. So you're always going to see the gender gaps there.
Sure, yes.
But yeah, and as far as online dating, women, especially young women, and especially people who are gay or lesbian, they experience a lot more harassment of people sending them messages repeatedly, sending them sexually explicit messages and things like that.
Yeah, I see it all the time in profiles saying, I'm not sending you nudes, no dick pics, like a lot of very defensive behavior. Also, one of the things that I have seen is a rise in trans folks on the apps. And so 5 years ago, it was really quite rare. And so now these people are really opening themselves up, which I think is really great. But then it also opens you up to the person who doesn't welcome a trans person in their feed, so to speak. I have many female friends and women I've dated tell me stories of them politely declining an invitation or interest, and then almost always a man explodes on the other side and is incredibly rude, basically just really disgusting kind of thing. And so I think that is like super unfortunate because it hurts everyone. It really makes it difficult for people to approach dating, which should be fun and exciting and filled with wonder and possibility, with rather like apprehension, defensiveness, and so on that's there. And so I just think it's a double-edged sword for so many people because it gives access, but yet also gives rise to bad behavior.
Yeah, and that is totally what we found in the survey. Something I thought was really interesting is we asked, this is among all adults, not just those who are single, but we asked, has dating gotten harder, or is it easier, or is it about the same as it was 10 years ago? And almost half said it was harder. So we asked those people, why has dating gotten so much harder in the last 10 years? And as you might expect, women were a lot more likely to say that more physical and also emotional risk was the reason. But a lot of people said technology, just in general, online dating makes it harder to meet people in real life, things like that. You can't screen people as well. But then we also asked the people who said that dating has gotten easier in the last 10 years, why it's gotten easier. And a lot of those people also said technology. So
That's right.
I totally agree. It's really the American public is seeing it as a double-edged sword as well.
Yeah, I mean, one of the very real things pre-pandemic was because of the apps, it has become harder to approach people in real life. Because what's happened is I think the dynamic has flipped. That was that if you weren't interested in meeting someone, you had to kind of suffer through some awkward flirtations sometimes. And now it's the opposite, which is like, if you want to meet someone in real life, it's difficult to do because people want to be respectful because they don't know who's who and who wants what in those situations. And so, yeah, it reveals the sort of complexities of this. And some of it, frankly, has to do a little bit with like the apps are imperfect, right? They're not the ideal method by which to meet people. And there's not a level of accountability that exists in the real world. And if you set me up with a friend and then I was a jackass, you'd call me and be like, Pete, why are you such a jackass? Right? You know what I mean? And so there's not that level of accountability that exists.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be a jackass, don't worry. I rarely ever have let someone set me up either anymore, but that's the case. So let's go through some more of these. Why the rise of singles? So some of it's less pressure. Some of it is this sort of recognition and actually willingness and ability to say, I'm happy, that goes along with that kind of thing. What are some of the other things that you've noticed in your work or beyond that's giving rise to this?
Yeah.
This bigger group of solos?
I think one possible explanation could be just kind of the rise of economic opportunities for women.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, we've seen a big rise in the number of women who are breadwinners for their family. And it could be education as well. Education is kind of interesting because we see that college-educated women are more likely to be married, but then they also delay marriage more than women with less education.
Mm-hmm. Let's get into that a little bit because I think that this is very real. And I think it's a good development, right? So one of the things that you see worldwide is that countries that have a better social safety net, countries that are more egalitarian, also have more single people. I don't think it's because they're single. I think it allows people to be single. Like, if you can get universal health care, now you don't have to necessarily couple up because you don't have insurance.
Mm-hmm.
And then let's be honest, there was a time where as a woman, if you didn't want to live with your family, you need to get married because you couldn't get a job that paid well enough to live on your own and so on. And so anything that gives women access to education and greater economic resources then frees them up to enter into something voluntarily rather than as a requirement that's there. And also then the act of also pursuing education and economic opportunities, let's be honest, perhaps crowds out dating and so on. I do want to talk to you about this other issue, which I don't think has been talked about as much, at least in my readings, which is, again, as we said earlier, it's inescapable. Gender is inescapable. And so what's happened is as women have progressed and have done better and better, men have stayed stagnant or in many cases have fallen, right? So for example, like women outnumber men in undergraduate programs and graduate programs. Single women are more likely to own homes. Obviously, there's a whole ton of stuff about incarcerations, homicide, homelessness, addiction, and so on, in which men dominate all of those categories. And so to what degree is this sort of like, it's not the whole story, but it's still somewhat contributing. It's just harder for some people to match up now.
Yeah, I think that could be something. I'm very curious to see how the pandemic will affect all of this because we are seeing that the pandemic is having a much harder financial impact and work impact on women than on men. Mm-hmm. So it could be that some of the gains that we're seeing among women could be reduced because of the pandemic. I'm curious to see how this will play out and affect the marriage market, I suppose.
Yeah, I certainly think that there's a very real pain point within families. It's like suddenly now everybody's in the house. And traditionally, women have worked a second shift, even within sort of progressive couples. And so how much is this burden of kind of like the household really fallen even more on women's shoulders and creates those issues? I don't know about with regard to people living on their own as much that's there. But yeah, I do think that that's all very real. And I always come back to this idea of how kind of economics, capitalism, consumerism benefits singles. That is that it's just easier than ever to live on your own. You know, that like we now have urbanization. You have apartment buildings. They're essentially perfect for single people in a sense. This came up in a previous episode, but even like things like safety, having that kind of living situation really benefits women. Any sort of time-saving, energy-saving device, a washer and dryer, food delivery services, any of those things have a disproportionately beneficial effect for a single person because it frees up time and energy to dedicate to your career, to socializing. You don't need someone else to help maintain and develop a household. Does any of that stuff come up in your work?
Yeah, we haven't really looked into that much. Yeah, I guess one interesting trend that we've noticed is there's a rise in older people living alone. And some of that is because divorce has risen a lot. We call it gray divorce among those who are 50 and older. So we haven't done any research on this, but I could see a lot of those kind of time-saving devices being especially helpful for older singles who are living alone.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, look, if you just think about a mobile phone, so think about it like, one of the things that's really striking is that single people are more connected. They have more friends. They're more connected to their community. And so when you live alone, it's just nice to be able to, now you can just go out alone. Now you can just communicate very easily And so it has this sort of surrogate effect where before, if you didn't have a phone, you just were like, you are alone when you're alone. Now you may be alone, but you're not really, in a way. And of course, we can't ignore the role that birth control and fertility treatments have had, especially, for women, right? Like now you don't have to get married because you accidentally got pregnant.
Yeah.
Or you don't have to get married because you want to have a child. You can now do that on your own if you want. I actually have a forthcoming episode, solo parenting, and especially women who choose to do it without a husband, without a partner that's there. There's a whole bunch of others. We don't have to get into all of them, but, easier to divorce, immigration, shifts in religiosity, right? So fewer and fewer people are religious and hence less pressure. And then even stuff, I don't know how much that's affected, but like even just things like immigration gives rise to single people because single people are more likely to immigrate. But that's all of that, I think. It's interesting because, right, it's this mix of like innovation, changing perspectives, cultural shifts, and then just demographic shifts. Like just people are living longer. And then just because men die younger, you just have a bunch of older women who meet that criteria. Before we move on, is there any other things that stand out to you about the rise of solos, about the psychographics, the demographics, or the economic?
One thing I want to touch on that's related to something you said is in a survey, we found that relatively small shares of U.S. adults say being married is essential to live a fulfilling life. A lot of them say it's important, but not essential. And a higher share say that being in a committed relationship is important or essential. But it's only 16% say that being married is essential for a man to live a fulfilling life, and 17% say the same about a woman. So I thought that was interesting.
Let's be honest here. The contrast is that to become a man, that getting married and having kids was essential to that. And there are remnants of this belief where men like me might be referred to as a Peter Pan. Like, oh, he's just not willing to grow up, right? The idea that getting married and having children grows you up, makes you into an adult. It's a rite of passage that exists. And so anything that takes away that pressure, I think, is going to be useful. Because first of all, what a bunch of bullshit. Right? Like that's what does it, right? That's what turns you into an adult. To me, there's a whole wide array of other things that you can do that are meaningful, important, show responsibility, that has that same kind of effect. But the other one is, I really lament this. I'm actually encouraged by the findings, right? The fact that people get less pressure is a good thing, because how many people enter into relationships, cohabiting, marriage, whatever it might be, even dating, casual, because they feel like they should be, rather than it's right for them. And then maybe they compromise things that aren't right for them, whether it be lifestyle, whether it be where they live, whether it be how they live, how they spend their time, that I think is really unfortunate, that holds people back from whether it be like entrepreneurial adventures, artistic adventures, travel adventures, where people are just not really thriving in any way. I'm right?
I can only tell you what the data says.
I know you are operating as a Pew Research Center employee, so I can appreciate that. But I say it, and I believe that's true. I think it's easy to see. And it's why I'm not anti-marriage, because I think that marriages that do that allow artists to become artists and be artists, and allow entrepreneurs to be entrepreneurs, and allow people who want to travel, or people who don't want to travel to not travel, to be a good thing. And it's just the idea that some people don't get to be their true selves or authentic selves because they're trying to satisfy others, because it's still the norm. It's still projected. So I think one of the striking things is it's projected that 1 out of 4 millennials will never marry. Well, okay, that's pretty cool, I think. And that's down from like 10% of people would never marry kind of thing. But it's still 75% are expected to marry, right? So it's still an overwhelming majority. It's just
Yeah.
it's bipolar.
And the share of people who are not married has kind of plateaued in recent years. It's really been hovering right around 50%, and that hasn't changed much.
Mm-hmm. But I think that's a good number, the way I sort of see it. I mean, I was trying to think about this. Like, what is there that happens? Let's just say, I don't know what the marriage rate is right now. Let's say it's over 80%. What else is there that 80% of everybody does?
Yeah, not much. That's a hard number to attain in a survey.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know. What are the rates of high school graduation?
I don't know that off the top of my head.
I think it's around the same. I could be wrong. Maybe, high school. Maybe I'm overly pessimistic. But but my point is, it's very difficult to find anything that everybody does, right? It's not the case with religious activities. It's certainly almost anything lifestyle related is not that high. And so obviously like career related stuff, no. Education related stuff, no. It's very hard to find anything that so many people do. And then as a result, if so many people do it, is it because it's so right? Or is it just because it's so much the norm that's there? Any other sort of striking, interesting findings that you folks have with regard to this? I have one actually, which is, I just want to make sure we talk about it. So we already talked about half of singles are not looking to date or be in a relationship, but within the half that are looking, I found this interesting. Do you have those data in front of you?
Yeah, so among the people who are looking for a relationship or dates, we asked, are you looking for a committed relationship only, casual dates only, or are you open to either? And a lot of people said that they were open to either, 53% overall. So, only 28% were exclusively looking for a committed relationship.
Yeah, again, that goes against, I think, what people think is happening. I do think my sense is on the apps, there is pressure to say you're looking for a relationship. I think people are worried about being judged negatively. On Bumble, there is, you're looking for marriage, very rare, at least among women. Relationship, overwhelming. Something casual, and don't know. And so to me, that in between is kind of the don't know. I think don't know is a bad term. It suggests sort of like, I don't know. It just doesn't feel right or seem right, I think, because it doesn't capture the ambivalence as much as like uncertainty, I think. And then something casual is not exactly the right phrase. I don't know. And so people often default into relationship, in part because casual can, I guess, fit also in that sense. Mm-hmm. But again, I'm in a world where I want to normalize all of this. So it's normal to not want to date. If you do want to date, it's normal to not be looking for a relationship. That's what I took away from your survey.
Yeah, I wish we could have dug into this a little bit more to figure out exactly what they meant when they said that they were open to either. So it could be they might be looking for a relationship, but they're open to casually dating in the meantime. We don't necessarily know what their long-term goals are, I guess. Another just kind of interesting tidbit that I found, there was a small share of people who were casually dating someone. And we asked them this question too, are they looking for relationship, dates, open to either? And for the most part, these people are really keeping their options open and they're looking for something as well or to replace it, but only 5% of the casual daters said that they're not looking for anything.
I see. Interesting. Yeah, I think all of this is good. Like, I think when there's only one model of dating and relationships, it's going to be, first of all, it just can't work, right? Given that people have varied preferences. So you were saying, especially talking about LGBTQ communities. So now these are folks who are just naturally have unconventional relationships from a cultural perspective, right? There's greater acceptance of all of this kind of stuff. But like, we know that anything that's sort of heteronormative immediately marginalizes these folks. And so anything that we can do that makes unconventional relationships considered to be more conventional, more acceptable, now is going to allow people to live a better life in that sense. And so I welcome all of this. Like even you mentioned like living apart together is happening more and more these days. Like I love this idea. I love the fact that two people can fall in love, have a relationship, can even get married and get the benefits of marriage, but they don't have to move into the same city. They don't have to move into the same house. They don't have to move into the same bedroom if that doesn't work for them, whether it be because of their careers or because of their temperature preferences. Anna, this has been really great. Any other things that a solo listener should know that's going to let them feel more comfortable, more proud, that their decisions are sort of more reasonable, dare I say, more remarkable?
Well, we did find that about a third of singles who have never been married have also never been in a committed romantic relationship at all. And those people were considerably younger than average, but even 21% of never married single people, 40 and older, have never been in a relationship. And they're less likely to be looking for a relationship or date, so maybe they're part of the group that is just happy being single, but I found that interesting.
Yeah, okay, I hate to do this, but we're going to end on a slightly darker note, if that's okay. There is a rise in single living that I find concerning. So I've already alluded to some of it before, and these are sort of women in their 30s and 40s who want it, but can't find it. And they tend to be more educated. They just have a hard time finding a partner they don't feel like is a major compromise that's there. The other one are these young men who like women, who want to have sex, and they can't find a partner, these incels, these involuntary celibates. And I'm deeply concerned about that group, in part because it can give rise to misogyny in a way that is really disturbing and upsetting. And it can also, I think, lead them to withdrawal from society into their video games and their pornography, and to then turn into middle-aged men who are angry and bitter. And there's a term for them, MGTOWs, men going their own way. That I don't think that that's good for women. I don't think that's good for society. And I certainly know that when men hurt, they tend to hurt others. As we've alluded to before, right? These guys who explode when they receive a very reasonable, thoughtful, compassionate rejection, because it's a culmination of rejection after rejection after rejection. And at some point, they just haven't developed the kind of skills necessary to be appealing. I know this is probably outside of the work that you folks have done, but...
We have actually touched on this a little bit in this survey. So when we asked people who are single and not looking to date or for a relationship, why they're not looking to date, we found that men are about twice as likely as women to say that feeling like no one would be interested in dating them is a major reason why they're not looking to date. That was 26% of men who are not on the dating market. And then we also asked people who are on the dating market but have found it difficult to find people to date, why they think that is. And men were a lot more likely than women to say it was hard for them to approach people.
Yeah, I think some of that too is like men are unpopular right now. And a lot of like the kind ones, the decent ones, are scared because they don't want to do the wrong thing. And the ones who aren't scared are often causing problems because they're doing it poorly. I have a group of guys and we joke that we need to create man school to really help. Because, I mean, there's two elements to this podcast. One is this sort of celebration of single living, but the other one is how do you live a remarkable life? And no one really ever teaches you how to do this. You know, you're certainly not getting that in school. You may not be getting that from parents. And certainly you're not getting it from parents about how to be good at being single. And so I do lament both of these dynamics of someone who wants something but can't seem to find it because there are not good available options, or people who can't do it not because there aren't good available options, but because those options aren't interested in them.
Yeah, and I think that the American public also kind of shares your view on that. So 65% said that the increased focus on sexual harassment and assault over the last few years has made it harder for men to know how to interact with someone they're on a date with. Only 9% said it's made it easier for men.
That's interesting, yeah. And so, of course, I lament that because I want people to live their best lives. And so, of course, I want to try to help problem solve some of this kind of stuff. I feel like it's actually easier to help people learn how to be more appealing than it is to help them find better options. I could be wrong about that. That's there. So I do hate to end this on that kind of negative note, but I do think that, like, it suggests a need for more resources for single people, a la this podcast, other books that we're starting to see, and sort of the rise of single advocates and single educators and so on. I want to thank you for your work because, as I said, overwhelmingly, the research, the survey work that's been done has been focused on marriage and families. And so for you to spearhead and your team to spearhead this kind of work, I think is incredibly important because it is normalizing what seemed like abnormal preferences in living situations. So thank you.
Thank you.
You're great. I do appreciate this. And with that, I'll bring this to a close and I just simply will say cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening to Solo, the single person's guide to a remarkable life. For more about our guests and show notes, go to petermcgraw.org. Please subscribe and share with your single friends.